I used to work in a machine shop, and one of the things that we did a lot of was bearing work. So the bearings would go out of some big, huge piece of mine equipment, and they would throw those into the scrap bin, and they would go off to wherever they go off to. Bearings have really good steel in them, knife steel. They can be tempered. You can make a nice knife out of those by putting them in the forge. And so I like to pick those up. I like to bring them home. I like to kind of look at them and try to figure out what is this piece going to look like? What is it wanting to be, or what do I want it to be? And so I can put it in the forge and convince it with a lot of hammering. I've got lots of different size hammers, and put heat on that and on that piece, and put it over the anvil, and pretty soon it is something else, and it's unrecognizable what it started off being. So let's say it's a bearing or a bearing race when we start, and when we get done, let's say it's a knife. Well, one doesn't resemble the other one, but I knew what was on the inside of that steel. I know that in bearing steel, it's good steel, and I can see what's on the inside of that. And I guess the reason that it's so close to me is God did exactly the same thing with me. I wasn't necessarily a throwaway, but maybe I was just not claimed. And God saw what was on the inside of me. And so I'm not sure where the scripture is, but it goes something like the old man is dead, and there's a new man, a new creation. And I like to think that that's what I am. I'm still human, and I make terrible mistakes, and I'm still human, and I talk terrible to other people that I shouldn't. I shouldn't talk the way that I do to them. I judge people, but I am a new creation. I'm different than I was a few years ago, and that piece of metal that I put over the anvil is different. It will never be the same. It cannot possibly ever be a bearing race ever again. And my prayer is that I will never be the old man that I was once before. The society that we live in is definitely a throwaway, from pieces of scrap iron to people, and how we can continually, literally throw people away, human beings. I'm referring to abortion. I cannot understand how we can literally throw a human being in the trash can. It's just as... And so I think that's why this is so special to me. History with Amanda, history with acquaintances through the years. I think that's why this is really important to me, to have these redemption knives, I guess is what I've kind of labeled them, because they are redeemed. I get to be the redeemer, and Christ is my redeemer. I am redeemed. I am physically, spiritually redeemed because of my redeemer.
This is a topic we love to talk about on the ranch. I feel like we think about this a lot as we're working. And I think one interesting thing is that we have different, I guess we should start off with the question is what exactly are we talking about when we talk about throwaways? Because I think we kind of identify that term a little differently, each of us. Mm-hmm. So what would you describe? That's a question for all of us. What is a throwaway?
Well, most recently there was a man at our church that has been leading us through our Sunday morning class, and he's teaching us through a book that I can't recall right now, but in the book there was a man that lived across the street from the church for 7 years, and nobody from the church, from this particular church, ever went to see this man. This man worked on his motorcycle every Sunday, and that's no coincidence. I think he was asking for help, and the only way that he knew how to ask for help, and nobody from that church saw that he was asking for help. The only time that this church had a conversation with this man was to walk across the street and ask him to mow his grass. They never went over and asked him. I'm sure he looked different. He's works on his motorcycle every Sunday. I'm pretty sure that he looked a little bit differently. In my opinion, they threw him away. The end of that story is the author of this book had a prison ministry, and this man with the motorcycle got haywire with somebody and went to prison for murder because our society threw him away. What would have happened, what could have happened, didn't happen because this church was so judgmental that they threw him away. He looks different. He speaks different. I don't know this man. I don't know what he looked like, but I can stereotype a biker.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're all like, okay, he's got tattoos.
Exactly.
He looks a little rough.
Yeah. And so that's the kind of people that we throw away because they're different than I am. And the church is really good. The church in general is really good about, gosh, I just don't want to get my hands dirty. I just don't want to go talk to that guy because what if? Those are the people that Jesus sought out. Jesus didn't, he was in some pretty crummy places. He went one-on-one and sought out those people that were in question. The Pharisees threw that back in his face all the time. You're going to see these people that are crummy, that are no good, that society has thrown away. And I'll have to say, it's real easy to follow what the church is saying because sometimes those are the very hardest people to go visit with. I still think that this man was asking for help. And so he would have been one of the easiest people to talk to. Somebody in a suit and tie that sits in the bank maybe is the hardest person you'll ever talk to because what's he need with Christ? He's got everything that he wants or needs. This biker guy didn't have everything that he wanted or needed.
It's crazy how, as Christians, we can be, air quotes, so mature, go to church, do that whole thing, and then completely dismiss a human being because of just a perception. They look a certain way, and then we're just like, okay, we just need you to clean up your yard, sir, because we've got middle-class people who are trying to come here to check off a box and make themselves right before the Lord. So if you could just be inside your house and be out of the unseen and raise our property value. And it hurts me because I've been that guy wearing that $500 suit and the cool vehicle and being judgmental. And then on the flip side, living in prison for 2 years with people who've done really, who really fit that bill, and just seeing their hearts and seeing them, like you said, like just really craving some meaning and just, I don't know, my heart breaks for them because it's like, okay, I've been that guy on the other side who says you're worthless. And then you live next to somebody for a few years that is broken and looking for redemption. And when it finally clicks, I don't know. I've seen big guys with tattoos all over their faces go to church, in prison, and then come out crying and completely give themselves to the Lord. And they're incredible Christian brothers now that I write to on a regular basis. And I don't know. It just shocks me that I had to go through that experience. I had to go to prison to learn that people should not be thrown away. And I don't think I would have learned it any other way. It breaks my heart.
It's all around us. The church and how we serve. Amanda has a story of going to church 10 years ago, maybe not quite that long, about the lady shoveling snow.
Oh, yeah. So we were on our way to church, and, as someone who goes to church, you're not supposed to be late. You're supposed to be there on time, and you need to be at church. And when we were on our way, I was probably 15. There was this really old lady shoveling snow out of her driveway. And I felt like you really need to tell them to stop, and you can just go help her shovel the snow real quick, and then you can go on to church. And I thought, no, because if I make them stop, and then we're going to be late, and then what happens if we're like walk in and they've already started? And so I passed up a good opportunity to be exactly what Jesus asked us to do, servants, because I needed to be in a pew.
And that haunts you.
Oh, it haunts me. It haunts me. I wish I would have stopped and just helped her 5 minutes, and I could have helped her.
Yeah. And who knows what that could have meant to her. Sorry, I don't mean be digging. Like, yeah, you really. But because I had that I shared with you guys that I was on my bunk in prison, and I got to Matthew. I think it's Matthew 25, where Jesus says that at the end of the world, he's going to separate the sheep and the goat, and he'll say to the sheep, "Well done, you guys get to come in because you fed me, when I was hungry. You visited me when I was in prison. You visited me when I was sick." And they're like, "When did we do any of that?" And he's like, "When you did it for the least, not the greatest Christian, but the least, the Christian who barely qualifies as a Christian. When you did it for him, you did it for me." And he turns to the goats and he says, "By the way, you never did this. You never visited me in prison. You never you never gave me a cup of water when I was thirsty." And they're like, "When didn't we not do that?" He's like, "When you didn't do it for the least in the kingdom of heaven." And I sat on my bunk and I realized that I'd been a Christian for, I don't know, over a decade, maybe 2 decades, and never done anything like that for another human being. And I remember the first time I was like, okay, I'm going to go find this guy. He doesn't have any food because he's the worst in that building. So by definitions of prisons, there's hierarchy of crimes, and he committed one of the worst crimes. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go find this guy some socks. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do whatever I need to do to help this dude. And it was like the first time I got my ass out of my chair to help another human being. I don't know. That scared me. To think, man, I'm 40 something years old, and it's the first time I'm helping another human being.
It is hard. That's why we don't do it. It's hard. Those people, see, even that statement saying those people. Mm-hmm. I'm judging them by saying those people, instead of saying people, or it's our people, or we're all in this together. It's so easy to judge. It's so easy to say those people. It's just how we're wired. It's how society has taught me that it's me and them. Yeah,
we separate ourselves. That's so bizarre.
We do.
It's so bizarre.
That goes into what you just said, goes into what I would call a throwaway, is someone that is unseen and misunderstood in society. And because we don't understand that person, we throw them away. We cross the street, we pass by, we ignore them. It's uncomfortable, or we don't see them. We don't realize, we don't see people's hurt. We're blind. We are busy. We go to church instead of shoveling the snow, and we miss the hurt. We miss the person crying in the corner. We miss the woman who just told her kids that she doesn't have enough money for the groceries, and we go, well, get out of the line so I can buy mine. And so those people who are unseen and misunderstood, they're just begging for something.
I love that about our definitions, because in your heart is towards innocent people who are thrown away. Mm-hmm. Todd's definition is people we assume are up to shenanigans. And then my definition is people who have committed. When I think about throwaways, I think about my neighbors who will tell you, yeah, I murdered somebody and I really regret it, but it's too late. And so I think that's an interesting thing. And yours is really tragic. And I think because it never occurred to me that this is still happening in the United States. And I want to hear a little bit about your story, because when you told me that orphanages still exist, I remember saying, no, they don't. And you're like,
yes, they do.
They just have a different name now.
They have a different name.
You got to tell us about this.
So for me, the throwaways that are close to my heart are people with my story. And those are foster kids and girls, people in group homes. And group home is now what an orphanage is. Orphanage is someone who doesn't have parents, or their parents didn't want them, or they have nowhere else to go. And that's what a group home is their parents made mistakes, and the kids might be a little harder for a foster home to have, or there is no foster home, or the parents literally sign over their rights and say, we don't want you. And that's a group home.
And somebody like me would think, okay, cool, a group home, that sounds nice. Like it's got nice individual rooms for everybody.
It's not individual rooms.
I'm probably mistaken.
Yeah, it is. It is a child prison. So I know I've been in 2 personally and worked at a 3rd. And you're not in your own room. You have bunks, and you have a roommate. a cellmate.
I was going to say, we call them cellies. Yeah.
In the group home I was in, I was young, and it was in Denver, and it was huge, and it was co-ed. There was boys and girls, and there are rules, like your door isn't shut, you don't change in your room, there's certain time periods you can go to the bathroom, this is when you eat, this is when you go to school, this is when you do these things, you have visiting hours. This time your parents can't come unless it's visiting hours. You only get calls at certain times. When you leave, you have all your personal items. You're not allowed to take your personal items with you. They let you choose one.
Oh, see, this is why this hurts so bad. Like, I want to cry when I hear you describe this, how you grew up, because that is prison to a T. Like, you just add names like work change. Work change is you can't leave without your personal items. You got to have specific clothes. Yeah, and you feel like cattle. All your rights are taken away from you. Like, it's so heartbreaking to think that you grew up and your only fault was your parents were a problem.
Right. But society doesn't see that. They see somebody's in a group home and they're being punished. Well, you're not allowed to do these things, so you did something. You're not allowed to go places. People look at you like you did something wrong. And there's some kids in group homes that they might have did something, but a lot of times it stems off of their parents. It's a chain reaction. But for me, I literally did nothing wrong. My parents did, and here I am having to pay the price. Here's my siblings having to pay the price. At that place in Denver, my siblings and I were taken at the same time, but they were younger, so they were in a different part of the group home, and there was a chain link fence between us. And I went to say hi to them one day, and the lady yelled at me and said, "No, you're one of the older kids. You are not allowed to talk to them." So here's my siblings on the other side of the fence, and I'm not allowed to contact them because my parents are screw-ups. So those are society's throwaways to me, is the people who you don't understand the situation, and yes, they get blamed. People, before we were adopted, you were going to adopt us, and one of the family members said, well, you probably don't want to do that because they're all special needs kids, or they'll rob you or murder you in your sleep.
She looks like a murderer, doesn't she?
I'm trying to think of all the times she's taken something from you, like a cow or something.
I have stolen cows, fair and share.
Fair and square. Yeah, I was trying to think of the cow. Not Peyton. No, that's not your cow.
No, 357. We call her Sideburns.
357. Okay. I don't know. That is unbelievable to me that that just exists in our world, because you and I were talking about how I guess foster kids is the right term, how they're looked on by society. And it is mind blowing, because you could really just say person on probation or parole after doing a prison term for something heinous, and foster kid, and their lives are almost identical.
Oh,
like it's shocking, and society's just like, okay, well, and I think maybe we throw people away for this. I don't know. I'm just this is not something I really fleshed out, but maybe we throw people away not because we have some real moral issue with them, but it's just a comfort thing. It's just a discomfort. We're just like, okay, you're them, we're us, and you're not driving the vehicle we want you to drive. You're not dressed the way we want you to dress. And
they're misunderstood. Really, all the throwaways that come in my head, me, my friends, my siblings, my family, it's all misunderstanding. It's you don't understand the story, so you come up with your own. You come up with your own narrative. And because of that narrative, you draw conclusions, you point fingers, and you tell them things like, you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you're not part of us. And those things really are wounding, and people carry that. And so being a throwaway is really hard to come out of unless you have help.
And people hear that. Like that's one thing that blows me away about your story, is that people have looked in your face and said that. And I don't know. I don't really get that.
People don't want to get their hands dirty. And kids like her, people don't want to get their hands dirty. I mean, you invite a couple of these labeled people into your home, and you have family members and church members telling you how stupid you are to do that because you know what could happen. You start wondering. You really do start wondering, well, what do they know that I don't know? And instead of throwing them a life ring to help save them, we, the church, sometimes are throwing them an anchor. We make it where they cannot swim. It isn't that we don't help them, but we make it where they can't help themselves. They can't do what they need to do. They're taught what they're taught. I remember one story she told me, and maybe you don't want to. How old were you when you stole your first car?
8.
8 years old, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I was 8. My father was a car thief, and it was normal. And there was a neighbor's van, and she left the keys in it, and so I drove it.
But you just took it for a joyride.
Yeah, I just took it for a joyride and
it's not
crashed
like you can take and sell it. Or
no, just take it for a joyride. But then, the cops are called. And when you're a child, you don't go to jail, but it is on and because you're a foster kid, it is on your record. You have a record as a foster kid. Everything you do is written down. Even the littlest thing. You say something off and they write that on your record. And so then when you go to different homes, they pass on that file. This is everything this child has ever done.
Oh, man, that is exactly like prison. That is, that blows my mind. But, oh gosh, so you crashed this car?
It wasn't
Could you
badly
even
done.
See over the steering wheel?
No,
She can't see over the steering wheel today.
I was a terrible. I had no experience driving at all, and so it wasn't a crash. It was just like kind of in the ditch. But yeah.
Oh, okay.
What's the 3 letters for cars?
GTA.
GTA. What was that conversation we had? And I'm kind of stupid, and so I didn't know what that was. And
well, my siblings and I were all talking about GTA and when I did it versus when my sister did it, versus when my little sister did it, and my brother's the only one who hasn't gotten a GTA anyway. And so he was like, "What are you guys talking about?" And we're like, "Oh, Grand Theft Auto," and he's like, "Oh, you mean the video game?" I'm like, no.
So Dakota's the only one that's never stolen a vehicle. He's the only boy, and he's the only one that hasn't stolen a vehicle. I guess he's just a slow learner. I don't know. what's wrong with him. I do remember that GTA, and I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't even know what we were talking about.
But as somebody who grew up in that world, it's just like part of it. It's like when you hear people growing up in gangs. It's just something you do. And so these kids, when people say, well, they do these bad things, we're not innocent. Some of us really are innocent. Other than that, I haven't done anything. But other kids haven't even done that. My brother, for one, and he had everything said to him the same, and he's never done a single thing. But you have other kids who do those things. But you grow up. One of the girls that I worked with, she's 13, and she is addicted to heavy drugs because of she did with her mom. And so it's just part of it. But yeah, society, they don't understand that. It's weird to them. They don't understand growing up in that. They don't understand coming out of it. They don't know how to help with it. And so it's way easier to say, well, your kid's not allowed to play with my kid, or, I'm not going to work with these kids, or let's go on the other side of the street because that girl looks weird. And it's easier than saying, tell me about your story and helping.
And I can't imagine being if I wasn't a believer, walking into a church and trying to somehow find the explanation for how I overcome my sins, when that's the mentality. If everybody's like, oh, you're different, you're garbage, we don't want you. Mm-hmm. Why would any non-Christian ever want to be around a Christian? It makes no sense. And I totally get it. I get the criticism that we all get, because I've been on the other side of that. I've been the guy to be too good for another person. And I don't know. I don't see a solution. I don't see an answer. How do you tell somebody that's like that as a believer, hey, like, you're totally missing the mark as far as what God wants for your heart?
Some of that is so plain that we can't see it. There are some children that got in trouble for stealing from a store, and what they stole was bread. So if everything in the store, they chose bread, well, they got in trouble for that. Instead of feeding them, these people were hungry, starving, so they stole bread. They didn't steal matchboxes, the matchbox cars. They didn't steal a Game Boy. They stole bread because they were hungry. And instead of asking why are they stealing bread, they only see that they stole.
They brand them as a thief. They're thieves on the record, but the record won't say what they stole.
I think that's where I think part of this is judgment, right? It's easy to judge another person.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other part is our own discomfort and our own insecurities. Because if we recognize, hey, these kids stole bread, they're not being fed. Now I have a responsibility. Now I have to deal with my own insecurities. I don't feel comfortable. It might not be that I'm, as a Christian judging somebody else, but I feel like I am not going to say the right thing or do the right thing, or I don't know how to handle this. And so we hide behind judgment. We hide behind these walls that we put up. And I think that's the thing that we have to start working through, is we have to realize we're not different. We're broken people. But if we recognize someone else's brokenness, you have to look at your own, and there's no way around that. And so it's easier to put on put up this wall and sit and judge from that wall, because then you don't have to deal with your own brokenness and your own failures and your own things.
It's like you just said right now, then you also have a responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those things are huge burdens, and they are heavy, and they are hard, and people aren't ready to carry that. But that's what Jesus asks us to do. He says, you carry my burden. And so today that might be feeding that kid that stole that bread. Tomorrow it might be, turning the heat on somebody who needs some heat. And that heat is not judgment. That's the one thing about those knives and how this connects with this, is when you build a knife out of something that was thrown away, you're not judging it. You're not saying you're no good. You're saying you have a purpose, and now you need to heal from being thrown away, and I need to make you into this, and it's going to hurt. We have to hammer you out. We have to heat you up. We have to treat you. We have to work you into something new. And that burden is hard, and that healing is hard, and that I think you call it tempering, and you can continue that, but that being in the fire isn't judgment, it's healing. It's opening that wound and making it something else. And when you're done with those knives, they're not perfect. They still have those blemishes, and that's what makes it pretty.
Mm-hmm. That's why this is such a parallel to me, or for me, is because I was the trash on the floor. God, Jesus, saw on the inside of me, and he chose to redeem me. He chose to make me better, and I resisted, just like the metal on the anvil resists. And Jesus and me both have bigger hammers. If it won't move, I get a bigger hammer. And if I don't want to move, he gets a bigger hammer, or he turns up the heat. He chose me, and he's not going to turn me loose. And you could look at that as a good thing or a bad thing. I, of course, look at it as a good thing. I'm always forever going to be in his hand. There's nothing I can do to escape that. Not that I'm looking for a way, but I'm always going to be in his hand because he chose me. And that steel on the anvil, it's nothing it can do. It's going to be something else. It just is. So that's why it's such a parallel for me. It's just as plain as day. For you, seeing the girls or the horses, it's as plain for you. And you seeing your prison friends. And for Stephanie, for you, you haven't got to talk yet, but it's so plain for each one of us that I think that's interesting. You may not see exactly what I see with the steel, and I may not going to see what you see in your life, but I guess the bottom line is Jesus chose us. He chose me, and he's not going to turn me loose. There's nothing I can do.
There's one thing we can do, though. In order to start that process, we have to choose him too. We have to let him. We can fight him all day long, and he can't make us into a knife if we fight him. And I think we talked a couple weeks ago about that victim mentality. You can sit in that pain. You can let that pain use you, or you can let God use that pain, and he'll make something great out of it. He'll take it. He'll take all those tears, all that pain, all those labeling, and he'll make it something worthwhile. There's that verse that says, I have started a good work in you, and I will not finish until it's done.
Because you said this, and it really impacted me a lot, that when you're in that vulnerable position, you're given two options when really you're just described a third. But you said people tell you can choose to be a victim, or you could be like this warrior overcomer, and both. I don't know. Describe that to me, because I think that's really powerful.
So when you are in the situations I've been in, and you're told all those bad things about you, hardly anybody gives you encouragement. It's always, you're not good enough. You're never going to be anything. You're not going to be any different than your parents, or this is where you are. You know where this road leads, and you're never going to be any different. There's no hope. There's no future. And being in that situation, I have seen two kinds of outcomes. The first is a victim that says, poor me. This is who I am. This is what people have said about me. And even so far as I've tried to do something else, and everybody says this so much, why even try? If you think I'm the bad guy, fine. I'm the bad guy. I give up. This is just who I am. This is what I'm going to be. And being that victim, you sit in it, and that's when people they don't get out of that generational curse. They're still in it. They don't break those chains. They keep it going, and that hurt goes from generation to generation because they are going to be the victim. And that pain, it doesn't do anything. It just sits there. It doesn't go anywhere, and it just festers and festers, and it hurts you and everybody around you. You can't get out of the drugs. You can't get out of the toxic relationships because you don't want to.
That first option, being a victim, is so interesting because anybody can perceive themselves as a victim, no matter what their role is in what's happening to them. And I in prison, there were guys there who've been committing murder since 8 years old. I have neighbors, acquaintances in prison who can't connect the dots between, hey, I've done very, very bad things. This is a consequence of that. They see themselves as a victim. CDC or DOC has taken time away from me. Okay, like that's insane. You need to connect the dots. Like there's consequences to your actions, all of us. And I think whether you're an orphan, literally in the foster care system, or you've committed a felony, we're all tempted by, okay, I'll choose pain. I'll choose that this world is doing this to me. And even if the world can look at you and say like, okay, yeah, you didn't really do anything to deserve that. This is what's so powerful about what you're saying, is that even if the world can look at you and say, okay, you didn't do anything to deserve this, you still can't choose to see yourself as a victim, because it doesn't help.
Mm-hmm. It's so that murderer, if he started at 8 years old, obviously I bet in his head, it's not his fault. It's his parents. It's his father. It's his uncle. It's somebody else's fault. And eventually when you're a victim, the only way out of it, well, there's two ways out of it, but the first step is realizing your life is your responsibility.
That's right.
They might have been the ones that made the mistake, and even you might have made a mistake, but nobody's going to come and drag you out of it. This is your life, your responsibility. Do something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between a victim and like somebody who, even if you were victimized, right? Even because what you went through was horrible and you didn't deserve that. But when you choose the victim mentality, you're saying, okay, that I'm not doing anything about this. It's somebody else's actions that are responsible. And whereas you can say like, okay, maybe I was a victim, but that's not how I define myself. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick myself up. I'm going to get out. I'm going to fix my life, because whatever it is that I'm living through, I'm taking responsibility and I'm going to change it. And otherwise you'll just sit there and wallow in that pain.
Yep. And that brings us to that second option, the warrior option. And I definitely identify with this one. Is I had those same messages. You're not going to be anybody. You're not going anywhere. No hope, no future. And I take that and I say, watch me. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm not going to stay there. I am going to take responsibility. I am not staying in this place. And one day you all will look up at me and say, oh, wow, yeah, I was wrong about that. And that's fine, except that path isn't going to give you what you want either.
Right.
Because that's still that bitterness, that drive, and it's not healthy because it's never good enough. I have to have more. And that warrior mentality is also walls. You build up walls that nobody can tear down, and you're alone because you have to prove everybody wrong. and nobody can be there because then you can't prove them wrong. Somebody else might have that credit. And so being a warrior is can be good, but if you have the wrong mentality there too, it's still not going to give you what you want.
And I think it's being a warrior it's a Band-Aid, right? It gets you where society, maybe you're presentable to society and you're right. But ultimately it doesn't solve the problem. And I have an illustration. When you first described this to me, I thought it was so enlightening, because I thought about this guy who came in to speak at prison. He had committed a murder, and he described it. It was him and his buddies were just fighting outside, and it was an arranged fight. They were like, yeah, let's just box, and they were just bare knuckle boxing in the backyard. And one of the other guy was stronger and bigger, and ended up going way beyond what he should have done. And instead of being just a friendly fight, he actually like really humiliated and hurt him physically and in horrible ways in front of all these people. So the guy took his pain out by driving all the way home, getting his gun, coming and killing him. And he had served his sentence. He had gone through all the treatment and done the warrior thing, right? He fixed himself. He did all the things he should have done, and got out of prison. In prison, he earned multiple degrees, got out. The CDC in California ended up making him part of like this education program, gave him this cushy job of recruiting around the state other inmates to go leave prison to be educated at higher institutions. Basically the poster boy of what CDC wants for a rehabilitated person. And as he was telling his story, he was telling about how his crime committed, and his anger flared up again. And he, just in telling the story, he got so angry, and you could see the hurt that this guy was still causing him decades later. And I think he even said, like, I would do it again. Mm-hmm. I would do it again. And when you said that whole overcoming, it's not the solution, because the world gives you, okay, you can be a victim or you could beat it. And either way, those two aren't the solution. They're not the answer. It's not enough.
It's not enough unless you put that one piece in there, and that's correct motivation. And where does that correct motivation come? And that's Jesus. Because when you're a warrior, it is based on anger. I'm going to do this almost so I can hurt you, so I can prove you wrong enough to twist that knife. And so then the victim is sad and depressed and just like given up. So where does our hope come from? And as that warrior mentality, for me, bringing Jesus into it gives me compassion for everybody, for the people who said those things about me, the people that I see being labeled. I have a huge amount of compassion, and I don't judge. I have patience, and my heart goes out to these people, and I still want to rise above, and I still don't ever want to be in that position. And there is some things I will never do, because I never want to be my parents. But when you bring Jesus into it, your motivation is different.
Yeah, because it's a weird combination, because you're rising to serve, you're rising to be humble. And Stephanie, you were just saying that about how we're broken too, and we lose sight of that. And I think that's the us versus them difference that Stephanie's describing, is that Jesus talks about two people go to pray, and he says one is the Pharisee who looks up and he says, "Thank you for not making me a sinner," which on the superficially, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm glad I've never committed a murder or done these terrible things. And the Pharisee says, "Thank you for not making me that way." And Jesus says, but then there was this other guy who did all these terrible things, and he gets down and he doesn't have the boldness to even open his eyes to look up, which is the custom of the day, was to pray with eyes wide open, looking up towards the Father. He says, this sinner can't open his eyes. He's on the ground, head bent, just humiliated by his failure, and he's hitting his chest saying, "Please forgive me, I'm a sinner." And he says, the guy the one who's righteous is that one, because he acknowledges his brokenness. And this other guy, who's by every standard of his time is doing the right thing, he is not justified. and because he's not acknowledging. And so I think there's this interesting thing where the world looks at itself and says, okay, I've got this bar, which I haven't crossed, so I'm okay. And these people are not. And Jesus says, it's not good enough. You have to really humble yourself and say, okay, whether I've been victimized or committed a crime, it doesn't matter. I'm a sinner too. I really regret it. So now I can serve you, even as you hurt me, even as you judge me. And that's why I think your statement was so powerful, because there is no solution apart from Jesus. You're either going to be a victim or be superior to other people and carry around that brokenness forever.
Yeah. The victim can't help anybody because they see things through a twisted way, and the warrior can't help anybody because they view things in a twisted way. We call it going back into the trenches, and that's my goal. I want to use my story to be able to go back into the trenches and pull people out. And I can't do that if I don't view it correctly. If I don't say, this is what happened, I can heal from it, I'm going to move on from it. And because God has shown me what he's done with my life, he's taken it and made it into this beautiful thing and this person that I am proud of. And because he's done that, now I am in a position where I can look in somebody's life and say, hey, I've been there, and this is sound advice.
And I think for anybody that doesn't know your story, and we're going to do a podcast where it's you telling us your story. But they might look at you and say like, okay, Amanda doesn't know what it's like to really be a victim. And they might say like, oh, okay, she grew up in foster. That's not really a victim. And we're not going to get into it, but you've gone through literally the worst things that a human being can go through. And so when you are telling people, hey, that's not the right mentality, you're coming from a position of somebody who, like you have the right to say that to somebody. Mm-hmm. I think that's fair enough to say. And
I choose God, and that should tell people something. I have been through a lot, and a lot of people have, and I choose God, and there's a reason, because he's been there. And I think we're going to talk about that at some point, is he has always been there. He has never left my side. He's the only one who has loved me through everything and has been there through everything.
Well, and let's talk about it now, because I remember when you were sharing a little bit about your story. And by the way, for anybody listening to this, like we're just talking at the ranch. Like it's like, so I'll hear bits and pieces. And so I'll hear a little bit of your story. And then in my head, I think like, oh, okay, so I'm assuming in my head, Amanda probably really struggled with God, perception of God, like really letting her down. And because as a human being, when hearing the things you've gone through, it's like, okay, so God really wasn't there for her. And then one day you said the exact opposite, that's something you never struggled with, which is interesting because for me it was the exact opposite. So you gotta finish that thought.
So we've all heard one of the biggest reasons people don't want to follow Christ is, how can a good God let all these bad things happen? How can a God who loves us, put somebody through this? And for me, it's two different explanations, but for one is I think we misunderstand who puts us in those situations. God gave us free will because he wanted somebody to love him on their own. He doesn't want to make us love him and make us obey him. In order to do that, he gives us free will, which means free choice. And my free choice might look different than your free choice. My free choice might be living a great life, have a job and a family and that white picket fence. Somebody else's free choice is murdering somebody because he made him mad. And people say, well, why did God let that happen? Well, God can't let me live my life how I want and then change how you live yours. That's not fair. That's not just. He can't pick and choose who he gives free will to. And unfortunately, as humans, we take that free will and we do bad things with it. So I think that is number one, is we have to realize that those bad things in the world, he does because he loves us and he wants us to choose him. In order to choose him freely, we get to choose other things freely, which hurts. And so that's number one. For me personally, there's a story. He was a Greek guy, and I cannot remember his name, but the Romans were coming around and saying, you have to say that you're not a Christian or we're going to kill you. And this one guy stood up and said, I will not, because I will not deny the one who has been faithful to me my whole life. And that is exactly how I feel. God has been faithful through it all, and he has never failed in showing me why. I have been through those bad things. And at the time, maybe I didn't understand, but I feel like I have a real relationship with him. If I'm mad, I can tell him I'm mad. If I don't understand what he's doing, I can tell him that. And he shows me. He has showed me, look, I know this hurt, but this is why. This is what I'm doing with it. Yes, this happened, but look down this storyline. And that's why I don't blame God, because everything that's ever happened, he's given me a reason why. And he has shown me, look, you might have gone through this, but like working at the group home, those girls needed to hear that somebody else has been in that place. And having a staff member down there that does not know their story, has no idea how they feel, doesn't help them. But for someone to sit down and say, wait a second, here's my story, and it's the same as yours, they go, oh, okay. So now we're making progress. Now it's a relationship. Now we're going to go somewhere because I don't have to be this way. You did it. I can do it. And so God has been there. And when I'm confused and I don't know why he's doing this, he has always answered me through somebody else telling me, like, hey, have you ever thought of this? Or even like opening up a devotional and it just happens to be what I need to hear that day. He has shown himself over and over and over again. And so I don't doubt him and I don't blame him because he has used it for good. And there's that Jeremiah 29:11, and I like it in the Message version, but it says, I will show up and bring you back home. I know what I am doing. I have it all planned out, plans to take care of you, not to abandon you, plans to give you the future you hope for.
I love that passage. It speaks so loudly because your message is really great for people who haven't really necessarily done anything wrong. And you're telling them, hey, even though you haven't done anything wrong, and you're going through a difficult time, God still loves you and he's faithful to you. And I read that in prison too, and it was meaningful to me because I have almost the exact opposite message where I did do something wrong and I felt really guilty about it. And I just assume, okay, God's going to destroy me now. Like that's what he does, right? Like you read the Old Testament, you do something wrong and fire comes out of somewhere or the earth opens up. And that message is really interesting because God is speaking to the Israelites after 400 years of idolatry. And that's spoken right as they're going to exile. They're being punished. He says, you're going to be gone for 70 years. There's consequences for your actions, but the plans I have for you, I'm not here to destroy you. Mm-hmm. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Jeremiah, I've been reading Jeremiah for 3 years now. I'm slowly going through it in the Hebrew, just like soaking it bit by bit, because all over he's telling people, you messed up. There's consequences, and there were consequences in prison for me, for sure. But he said, I love you. And the way a dad disciplines his child is what's happening to you. I'm disciplining you, and you got to go through this, and it's not going to be fun, but I love you very, very much. And as I went through that very painful and terrifying experience, I walked out seeing the exact same thing that you see when you went through your difficult times, is that God still loves us and he very much wants the best for us. And it doesn't matter if you're a victim by the world society or a criminal, if you're a victim by the world standpoint or a criminal by the world standpoint, God is good. And there are consequences, and we just have to trust him. And he was kind enough to show me how he was protecting me and things I'd never seen before. And I remember he gave me this. He reminded me once of my daughter Yao. So when she was little, she's so sassy sometimes, and I don't know what she did, and so I spanked her, and I never spank my kids hard. And she was just getting old enough. She must have been like 5 or 6 or something. And I'm not trying to hurt her, right? So I gave her this spanking, and she was so angry at me. She just stared at me. She's like, I just want you to know that didn't hurt me. And I laugh about it now, but in the moment I was like, okay, I'm trying to. So I grabbed her and I pulled her towards me to hug her, and I looked her in the eyes, and she was so angry. She was like, just like, that didn't hurt me. Like, you failed at your, whatever you're trying to teach me here. And I was like, baby, I think she was like trying to stick her a fork in like the electrical socket or something dangerous like that. And I was like, that's the exact opposite of what I want. You can understand, like, I'm not trying to hurt you. In fact, I'm dedicating my entire existence to you not being hurt. And the only way I can get you to not be hurt is to teach you that what you're doing is very dangerous. I love you I just told her. And I don't know why I remember that, because I have a terrible memory. But I think God reminded me of that to say, that's exactly how I feel about you. You're sticking your fork in electrical sockets, and you got to go through something to really shake that off. But I love you very much. And I really hope that if people are carrying around, this idea like they're just too unredeemable, the world telling them, hey, you're worthless because you've done something, or just because the situation you're in, you have to trust God. You really just have to. And really, the gospel, right? Jesus died for our sins. He paid the price for our failures on that cross 2,000 years ago. We have to put our confidence in that so that we can become different. We can be full of His Holy Spirit and have the power to turn around to the people who are hurting us and say, okay, I'm here to serve you now. You can't do that just by becoming an overcomer or choosing victim mentality.
Yeah, and that's that new creation we're talking about. And that goes back to the knives. And that's why this knife thing is so beautiful. And sometime we'll video that and put it up there. But it is a new creation. It hurts. And now here you are, this beautiful masterpiece that is useful and has purpose and that people can look at and want.
I guess while you guys were talking, I was thinking about that process a little bit. That process takes a long time. After I pick that steel up and put it in the forge, I hammer around on it, and it looks kind of like a knife. It's different. It's not a bearing anymore, and it does look kind of like a knife. But then I put it on the grinder, and the grinder takes off little pieces, things, the impurities or maybe the scale from the forge, things that cause it to not be a knife, just little pieces come off. And then maybe I engrave on it and more little pieces come off. Maybe there's some file work and little pieces come off. And maybe I'm going to drill the tang for a handle and those little pieces come off. And I think that's me. I know that's me because God isn't done with me yet. He's still taking off these little pieces and fine-tuning and adjusting and things that cause me to fail, to fall, to sin. He takes those little pieces off continually, a little at a time. And so that knife process is a long process. And just like this is, you can't snap your fingers, and it just is a process. It just takes a long time, and He's not done with me yet. And I'm so glad that He's not done with me. And I complain. It hurts. It doesn't feel good when He sticks the grinder on me or whatever He does. But I know now, it took a long time to know He just isn't finished. It's going to be okay. And one day I'll be a pretty knife. But that isn't here yet. I still struggle every single day.
When I hear you talking about that, is you're describing what as Christians we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be the ones that are looking for that bearing, and for that guy who's going through something where he's maybe an eyesore on the property value of your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And we're supposed to have that heart and being like, okay, we need to send somebody out there, somebody who's tactful, and we need to see how we can serve that guy so that he can hear the gospel. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, we prefer to just grab a new piece of steel. And that's not God's intention at all. He tells us all over the New Testament, He's like, I didn't come for the righteous. Mm-hmm. If we're here looking for the righteous, then we're not doing what God wants us to do. He tells us, I came for sinners. And Jesus was so passionate about that He took heat, mm-hmm. and He lost followers because He's hanging out with tax collectors and sinners, the worst of the worst. And that's where His priority is. And I feel like in our churches, me, like I'm talking about myself. I would rather help that cute, newlywed couple that's going through normal first year issues than really reach out to, that foster kid who really needs something, or, who really needs a little bit of guidance, or that inmate who needs a little bit of advice, or needs some money on his books to just make it through, the month. It's so much easier to grab a new piece of steel, and God is telling us that's not the way I do things. I'm here to fix what's wrong. I'm here to fix who's broken, not grab the ones who look good on the outside.
Mm-hmm. Several years ago, our youth minister, his name is Mike. He lives in California now, but he did a sermon on the Great Commission, but he labeled it the Great Omission, and that's me. That's how I think all of us treat those people. Is it is the Great Omission. I think part of it too is we're studying through this study with a fellow there at church now, been a month or 6 weeks maybe. For some reason, society tells us that we need to go and reach 10,000 people or 1,000 people or something. And this study that we're studying through now is go and reach one. Just go find somebody, one person. And that's a little less intimidating. That's maybe a little easier. But that newlywed couple or the there's that whole group that's real easy. That's really, really easy. What could go wrong there? But come back in 4 or 5 years when he's an alcoholic and she's left and he's beating on the kids, and then that's not so much fun. And that's hard. And that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to do hard. I don't know how we got into that. We have Americanized our church so much. If Jesus wrote letters today to churches like he did in the New Testament, what would the letter look like that came to the church you attend? The church that you go to right now, what would that letter look like? I'm scared to know what it would look like. I hope that we're doing well, but I would be afraid to open the envelope.
Well, that's one of the things I love about Jeremiah is he's talking to people and he's saying, hey, I'm sick of your sacrifices. It's kind of interesting because he commands them, you have to make these sacrifices. And instead, God is like, I'm sick of it. And I think it's for the same reason. We'll go to church to check off this box. We're pleasing God with what we do our Sunday mornings, and yet our heart is far from him. And that's exactly what he says. I think that letter would look a lot like Jeremiah, like, hey, you're missing the point. And that's one of the things that Jesus is quoting right out of the Old Testament, which says, if you'd only understood when I said, I seek mercy, not sacrifice. Mm-hmm. We're missing that because it really, we want just bigger, more efficient, better looking churches. And I don't know, my prayer is that there's somebody listening to this podcast is the same boat that I was in, where it's like, mm-hmm. Okay, you look good on paper as a Christian, but you don't want to get your hands dirty. Jesus' priorities in the New Testament, when you look at his life, it's overwhelmingly a concern for people that are really, really broken. And every time he says he's going to judge Christians at the end of the world, he says, I'm going to judge you based on how you treat the least in the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think with that, I think we have to go through a process that we realize we are the least, that we are as broken as the next person, and I feel like if we don't recognize that, then we miss it. We miss the mark. If we don't realize what God did for us to the fullest extent, I am nothing but for the grace of God. And if I don't fully recognize that, how am I ever going to look at anybody else and have compassion, have mercy, love them in the way that Jesus loves? Because if I at any point think that I deserve something from God or that I deserve something, then I can say I'm better than somebody else. But I think that's something that God has really taught me is I'm nothing but for his grace, but for his mercy. And that allows me to look at everybody around me and see their brokenness, see their hurt, and love them and say, you know what, Christ loved me enough to die for me. He loved me enough to send somebody to say these words at this time to encourage me, to lift me up, to help support me in these difficult things. So I can do that for somebody else. And I feel like one of the common situations that I'm in is I deal with people that are making very difficult decisions, and by definitely the church's standard, but also the world's standard, have made the wrong decision. But all I see is somebody that's broken and needs someone to love them. Because you know what? I can't say that I'm any better. Given your situation, I can't pretend that I know what I would do. You know, I can say, okay, like God has taught me these things, and I hope that I could follow him in these ways. But given your situation, with what you've been given, with what you know, with what, with not knowing the Lord or knowing the Lord, I'm no better. And that allows me to love on people and serve them in ways that I couldn't before. I couldn't before God really made me understand. And I think that was a moment, that was a part in my walk with the Lord that really changed everything about how I interact with people, how I look at people, how I value people.
You're trying to see what made that happen. What you said, that you see people differently and that you look at people. So you're looking for something. What made that happen? What made you change and be?
I remember this moment that God just made it clear to me that I am nothing, that I am, and this idea of being a sinner, there's not that this idea. I think that there's this part of us as Christians that we want to be worth something. We want to have done all the right things, because then at least we've worked. There's a part of us that wants to earn our salvation. And I think there's this, I remember this moment where God just opened my eyes to the fact that even at my best, even though I can say I've not done A, B, and C, I've not done, these things, even at my best, I am so far from ever earning salvation that me at my best is worthless, and that Christ still died for me, that God gave that. And so with that, with this understanding that it is the sacrifice that God made for me, I can then say, hey, I can share this with others, because I am no better in any way, no better than anybody else. But so Christ died for me. He died for you, and I need to share that with you, and I need to love you so that you can see that, because that's why we're here. And I think if we don't understand that we are the least, that we are worthless, we are all of these things, and then we can't look at somebody else and not think we're better, and not think, oh, well, Christ died for me, but not so much for you. I don't know.
And I think that's why Jesus said, the guy, the Pharisee who prays that is unjustified. He's not the one who left justified. What is God going to do with that piece of metal that just will not bend? It needs to change, because we are broken, and we use this defense mechanism to feel like, okay, well, I'm not as bad as that guy.
Or I'm nice and shiny, but I'm still a broken piece of equipment that's sitting on the ground. I'm shinier, so,
Well, that nice and
I should be picked up. I don't know.
Like you said, that nice and shiny piece, sometimes the shiniest metal isn't any good steel. it's not
Yeah.
worth anything
Mhm.
because it's not good steel.
To answer your question, Jesus puts more heat on the piece that doesn't want to move. That's so their neck is so bowed and they are not going to move. Maybe that's the one that goes to prison. Maybe that's the one that finds himself in the shop by himself.
Yep. That's what he did to me.
It is. And
Yeah.
so with steel, you apply more heat. So Jesus can put more heat, and he's going to do that fits you, and that fits me, and fits Amanda, and fits Stephanie. And each one of those, that heat might look a little bit different, but he has a way of making us, to soften our hearts. And just like I have a way of softening the steel, it just is. You mentioned tempering. With a knife, when we get done, one of the last steps or close to the last steps is heat treating. A knife that's too soft isn't any good, and a knife that's too hard isn't any good. It'll break, and the one that's too soft isn't usable. You can't keep an edge on it. And so even with us, we have to have that correct amount of tempering when we get through this process. The person that is too hard, maybe they lean towards the legalistic side of things. Maybe they're the ones that, for heaven's sakes, if some kid comes into church wearing a ball cap, we can't have that. And we've had that. That has been a real deal. A kid comes into church with a ball cap on, and some bigwig in the church thinks he ought to leave because of that hat, and that's happened. And then the other thing is, on the other end of the scale, is that knife that is too soft. It won't keep an edge. I feel like that's kind of where some churches are, some people are, is we've been Americanized so much that issues that are in the news now are okay in church because we don't have an edge, we don't have a backbone, we're too soft. And some things are not okay in church. Some things are just not okay. Now, that being said, we're supposed to still love that sinner, love that person that is doing what we know is not correct biblically. Instead of casting them out, throwing them out in the street, we love them. Hopefully that motorcycle guy that lives across the street from our church, and I know this isn't true, but hopefully he feels welcome to walk through the door and we would welcome him. I think that would happen. I think that would happen. It's a very much of a fine line. And for some reason, with a knife, it makes perfect sense to me because I'm not very smart, and God made it so I could understand. And maybe I can go find that one person. Maybe that one guy is out there for me, or one person.
And I think that's perfect because I think a lot of times when we think we need to change the whole world, we just are incapacitated. But if you're like, okay, just find one person, I don't know if it's okay for me to share the story about the kid you were trying to, it was a foster kid, and you were wanting to get some help for, I don't know if you're looking to have people join you in getting him guidance, and nobody stepped up to the plate, and there's a lot of reasons for it, and that's just not okay. When that's Jesus' priority, we should be able to find Christians who can come forward and say, like, okay, there's somebody there who needs help. And it just has to be one, and it doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. I know when Stephanie was a single mom of 4, sometimes it was just people coming up, and in a world of people almost punishing you for just being an innocent human being, you'd have 1 or 2 people who'd just call and check up on you, and that's all that was a game changer for you when you had people just do kind, small things like that. I don't know. Like when you talked to me about it, you sounded like it was a big deal.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Amanda said earlier. People make up their story. You know, they want to create a story that they're comfortable with, or they're uncomfortable and they don't want to say, they don't want to step on toes, or they don't want to do the wrong thing, so we don't do anything. And I think something that I've learned is that as awkward as it can be to, send a text or to call and say, hey, you're just on my mind. Or the other part is we get busy, and I've been that person that's busy, and I have learned that, from my own experience, how valuable it is for someone to follow through. I have the best intentions to send a card or to stop by or to do these things. And I've, had to learn to be more intentional about those things, to make those things my priority, because it is easy to be busy with our own distractions, to be busy with our own life. And I think that if we are just open to the Holy Spirit, He'll direct us. Because I think that's what it was in the moments that Amanda says you open your devotional and it's exactly what you need to hear. But I had someone hand me a devotional and I opened it up and it had the thing that I needed to get through that day. And so I know that the Holy Spirit put me on that person's heart so that I could get that message. And I feel like God does that. He uses His Spirit to direct us and, puts it on our heart to stop. And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But our goal should be to be more open to the Spirit, to be more driven so that we can be that encouragement and to learn from our mistakes. There are times where I've been the person that, you're too busy and you don't stop. You don't, and that there's a part of you that eats you up in the inside because you're like, geez, I wish I would have, but maybe it's got to let that happen so that you didn't miss, maybe someone came behind you that he was like, okay, so, you're not going to stop this time. I got a backup plan, but next time I need you to do this. I need you to step into this situation. And that's,
I have to
huge.
share the story because, in prison, obviously it's very dangerous. And there was a few times where I was really, really scared for my life. And I would fast and just ask the Lord, for His will, whatever it was going to be. And there was a couple times where I lost contact with Stephanie, and she felt inclined to fast and pray. I wasn't keeping her up to date with anything. And then she'd get a phone call from somebody say like, hey, I'm just calling because it's on my heart to really pray for you right now. She's like, thank you. I'm really nervous. Again, Stephanie had no clue what I was going through. And then she'd get another phone call and say why is this on my heart right now?
It was 30 days or so that we hadn't spoken. And towards the end of that middle end, I couldn't sleep. And the Lord just had me up praying for 3 days. And at the end, or on the third day, I got a call from 2 people saying, hey, I haven't been able to sleep for 3 days. What's going on? Why is this, and specifically for David and protection. And it was just really interesting because I got these calls from people that one that I talked to regularly and one that I hadn't talked to in quite a while. And ironically, that next day, I got a call not from David, but from somebody else that had been with him, telling me the situation. And he said, there's this building, no one comes out of it. And he had been on his bunk next to people that were being beaten to almost the point of death, and he was untouched. And it was just, it's just interesting because for me, it was learning to listen to the Spirit. It was learning to pray without ceasing, and that was a huge thing for me. And for David, it was a whole different.
Yeah, I think for me, it's this thing okay, well, people can cut you out of life. When you go to prison, it doesn't matter what you did. People are cutting you out of their lives. It just doesn't matter. And I think it's similar to foster kids. It's it doesn't matter if you're innocent or not. You're getting cut out of everybody's life. And so, you just assume you're totally isolated. And I was going through this, and God saved me from some really tricky situations miraculously. And when I was able to talk to Stephanie, she told me it must have been at this time. And I told her, you need to call these people and tell them that God was speaking to them. And all it took for that impact on my life and Stephanie's life is somebody who is in the Word, attentive to the Spirit, and caring about a throwaway. That's where God's heart was, and they are literally like life changers for us. And I think we can do that for other people. And it doesn't, like you said, you don't have to make this huge thing about it. You just have to just care.
For some reason, the church, the Great Commission, he just says to go and make disciples. And somehow or another, the church, we've turned that into, and there's nothing wrong with going to Africa, going to, places. There's nothing at all wrong with that. But sometimes it's the guy across the street. I don't know how we've changed this, how we've morphed this going into any further than your front door. It could be somebody in your house that needs to hear the word. I don't know. We've changed that up a little bit. So I don't know. That's just what I was thinking of as you guys were speaking. It's not that hard.
Yeah, if you're a Christian that's going to Africa to share the gospel, you get a pass on this. Like you're good. But if you're just sitting at home,
yeah,
right? Like, hey, do something.
But don't you think we've blown that up into something bigger than it really is? When we read Matthew, and he says, "Go and make disciples," I've always thought missionaries are people that go to a different country. Missionaries aren't the person that walks across the street.
Well, I think what that does is you're looking at like, okay, well, if I'm not a missionary, then that's their job, and I'll support them in that. But then maybe I don't have to. I'm not thinking that I have to be that.
Maybe.
Maybe. Or we think these big picture things, right? Where, there's the people that walk by me and encourage me just with a simple word. And that's really all I needed. Was just, hey, I see you.
And that's the thing about these,
I'm like, that is all that it takes to change someone's world. But we think, well, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't have the things to go overseas, I don't, or whatever.
No, I was just going to say that's the thing that you just said, is that simple little things mean so much. They really do. They, especially like for these girls, like they crave it. They just crave it. And so how hard is it to walk across the street and give it? And I mean, sometimes it's not, sometimes they don't take it as well as you thought they would, but in their head or their heart, they start thinking about it. And so maybe it doesn't. Missionary, you're assuming at that very moment something great's going to happen. And sometimes that small word, that small act that is so important, sometimes you won't see that right then. Sometimes it'll be a little bit of a seed in their heart a little bit.
I remember in prison we had these guys visit, and it was like this, like, I don't know what they did. It's called like Inside the Walls or something. And they would bring like motorcycles and ride around, and it was just weird. It was weird having people inside the yard because we're so isolated. And that was their prison ministries. They went in there and they had these loud Harleys, and they might have had a cool car or something. And then they would, these volunteers would share the gospel. And there was this one guy there. And by the way, for an inmate, any interaction with an outsider is incredible. And like, I don't know what it's like for a kid in foster, but just any act of kindness goes such a long way. And one of the guys that was there, I went, and me and my buddies went and shook his hand, and he was very scared of us. I don't, when you look at me in person, I'm not very intimidating, but when you got your blues on, you just don't know. Maybe David's got a knife in his pocket. I don't know. And he was very, very nervous. And so we were just asking him like what caused him to be there. And he's like, man, I've never done anything like this. I've never come, I've never even seen a prison. I just wanted to do something. He's like, and these guys talked to me in a way. I knew I wanted to serve God in some way. And so he goes to his prison and he has no idea what he's doing. He sat there and talked to us, and it was really meaningful to us just to have a connection with just a normal, non-criminal person. Was so meaningful. And it's like, you did it, man. Like, I'm so glad you came. Like, it's meaningful. I think he was just there for like 15 minutes and he was so scared.
Well, that's a great example of the just that thing that comes to my mind is it's our own insecurities that keep us from doing things. And if we can step outside of that and just be uncomfortable for just a little bit, like God can use us in such big ways, but we have to take that step. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable or willing to not be effective. That's, I think, another thing. We're afraid that we're not going to say the right thing. And I have situations at work where, especially with losses, where there are nurses that won't take those patients because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. Well, I mean, you might. I mean, there's no right or wrong thing when someone's going. There's no book that says for any given difficult circumstance in life that this is what you say and this is going to be right. Because I can say something to you that reaches you, and in the same, say the same thing to you in that same circumstances, and you're offended, but that's where the Holy Spirit drives you. And I think, but you have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
And don't get discouraged.